In this video, I'm going to be painting washes to create this simple mountain landscape. Welcome to the Watercolour Workshop. So before we start, I'm going to tape my paper down to the board. But I don't tape all the way around the edges. I just roll up a little piece of masking tape, stick it onto my board, and then stick my paper on the top. And I put a piece like this in each corner. I'm wetting the paper now with a nice wide soft brush. Wet it all over. Just a word on the paper. It's not 100% cotton. In fact, I don't think there's any cotton in it at all. It's by a brand called Seawhite, which is available in the UK. It's 350 grams, so it's a decent heavyweight and it's nice and white. It's good for practicing on. Now I've got my ultramarine blue and I've squozen a good sized blob onto my palette. And then I'm dragging some of it across into a separate well, which I'm adding water to. So I'm getting a nice diluted version of that blue, and I'm applying it as evenly as I can across the top of the paper. The paper's flat at this stage. I'm just trying to get it on even like that. And even though it's flat, you can see it's already starting to run down the paper. So now I'm going to pick it up, pick the board up, and just tilt. It's about 30-40 degrees, and I'm letting the paint run down the wet paper. It's still very wet at this stage, so I can make little adjustments like you saw me do there. I can see a little stripe gathering on the left. So I'm just going to remove that with my damp brush. Because it's wet at this stage, you can make little adjustments like this, but it's best to just apply it and then let it run down and leave it. Having said that, I now went in, decided I needed a little bit more colour on the top. But it is possible to do this while the paper is wet. Because it's not cotton, it's much harder to get a nice even coverage. But it is possible. Okay, so we're just going to let that run down, and then we're going to let it dry. And what I ended up doing is I put a jar behind the board to prop it up, and I let it dry at an angle. And it must be drying naturally. Don't dry with a hairdryer. And there it is, dried. Scrap of card to test out my next colour. Again, we're still using ultramarine blue. And we're going to paint on the first range of hills. I don't have a drawing, because I don't want any pencil lines on this. I want it to be very smooth. It's just a wavy line, so you don't really need to be concerned about drawing. You can have a reference photo in front of you if you like, for guidance. So the wet paint goes onto dry paper, wet on dry, and then I clean my paint off my brush. I wet the area directly underneath the line that I just painted. You can see me dip it in to my water and just drag it across, and then I'm just touching with the damp brush the paint that I've just applied, and you can see that it runs down a bit like the wash did initially. We're helping it down now by dampening the paint, and it just runs down into the area that we've wetted because it's flat. The painting is flat at this stage. And there we are. I've just put a little bit of extra pigment along the top of the ridge, and that's it dry. Again, I let it dry naturally, no hair drying. And I tested out my next colour. So this is a slightly darker colour, slightly darker value. It's still ultramarine blue. It's darker because it's got slightly more pigment in than the last layer. So the more pigment, the stronger, the darker the value. The more water, the lighter the value. So I'm just drawing another line and make a bit of a hash of it there, but that's not a problem. We'll just fix that. There we go. And as with the first hill, I'm painting a line. I'm painting a slightly thicker line because these hills are a bit nearer, so they're a bit bigger. And then I'm going to repeat the process of wetting underneath this line and then using my damp brush to persuade the paint that I've gone here to flow down into the wet area. So here we go, I'm wetting the area just below the paint and I'm not touching it, but now I am. Once I've got my wet area, I then just touch the paint above and let it flow down into this damp part of the painting. And then make any adjustments that I want to. And a third layer. And it's getting stronger now. So if you look over to the palette, you can see that I'm actually getting my paint now from the top part of the palette, where the ultramarine blue is much stronger. So the lower part has got more water in it and the upper part has less water. And so you can jump backwards and forwards between these two areas. It's good to have a couple of areas of your paint on the palette to do this. I tried to divide this hill range into two separate hills here, but because it was so wet, it doesn't really dry like that. But that's what I was trying to do there. Okay, wetting underneath the hill and then touching the wet paint above it, encouraging it to drift down. Fourth layer of hills, and the paint, the colour is getting stronger, the value is getting darker. So we've got more paint now. It's not neat paint from the tube, but it's a good, strong value. And then I'm dropping some more in along the top. And I'm happy to get a less smooth appearance here and more texture, because that's what you would get. The nearer you are to something, the more texture you would see. And final layer, again, it's the strong paint with a strong value from the top of the palette. I'm struggling to get it on smoothly here because really I should have switched to a bigger brush. If you're painting a large area like this, it's really much easier if you use a bigger brush. Bigger the brush, the fewer the strokes. So there are quite a few strokes in that which don't look too attractive at the moment. And then I thought I'd try to break it up with some clean water. Drop some clean water in to create some texture, but I think my paint is too wet for that. I should have waited for a while. And here it is the next day and it's dried off, and as you can see, this area here is not particularly good. There's a big white gap there, and the sky is very large. I should have perhaps started the mountain range higher up. As you can see, there's a lot of sky. So I thought I'd try to fill a few of those gaps. Here's a cork from the wine bottle, and I've just put some white watercolour paint onto it. I've got an old paint in there, a scrap, which I'm trying it out on, and a little twist, press, and you get a cork print on your painting. But you can make it into a moon very easily by just painting around the edge carefully to give it a more rounded appearance, but leave the cork texture in the middle, and you've got some instant moon craters. I wasn't happy with the nearest range of hills, so I've got some Payne's grey on my palette from a previous effort, and I decided to wash that over the hill. So this is a wet wash onto a dry layer. And again, my brush is too small. I'm struggling to get a nice smooth coat on. So then I decided to just get some wet paint and just drop it on. Now you can do this really easily with a mop brush, but this is just a round brush and quite a small one, about a size 8. And I'm really struggling to get the paint out of the brush, the water out of the brush onto the paper. So then I just dotted it on and I'm moving it around. So I've got some wet paint onto the wet surface. Then I give it a spritz with some water. And then I'm trying to encourage it to be as even a coat as possible. Bit like the first wash that we did for the sky. But I'm having trouble here, and I think this is because it's not cotton paper. So while that was drying, I decided to paint some birds. If you Google bird silhouettes, you'll get all these little shapes that you can practice. I've got my rigger brush, and I'm using the Payne's grey again. I'm practicing on my scrap before I go into the actual painting. And I painted on a few birds, mostly to fill that big white gap that I wasn't very happy with. And it also helps to give a little bit of depth to have these birds flying into the painting. And then when it's all dry, there's the moon, suitably pale and translucent, almost invisible. There's the birds flying across the valley. And there's that pesky hill in the foreground. It didn't turn out too bad in the end. So there we are. Hope you found that useful. And you'll join me again for another watercolour workshop.